Thomas Gray had always dreamed of adventure, and the Arizona Territory, with its vast deserts and rugged landscapes, was the perfect place for him to live out his ambition. As a young soldier, Thomas had been stationed at a remote fort, where he spent his days patrolling the harsh desert and keeping watch for any signs of trouble. The fort was on the edge of Apache lands, and tensions were high between the Apache tribes and the settlers. The heat of the desert was almost unbearable, but for Thomas it was a challenge he accepted with a sense of duty. He had been trained to fight, to protect, and to defend the fort, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he would face when he met Naya. It was a day like any other when the encounter happened. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty landscape. Thomas was on horseback, riding along a familiar trail with two other soldiers, when they came across a small group of settlers who had been attacked by a band of Apache. The settlers were frightened, but there was one figure who stood out among the chaos, a young Apache girl no older than 17. She was tied up, her dark eyes filled with fear as she glanced around, uncertain of what was happening. At first, Thomas didn't know what to make of the situation. The soldiers quickly moved to secure the area, ensuring that the attackers were not in sight. The Apache girl, still bound, was dragged to the center of the camp. She was clearly defiant, her posture straight even in captivity. Thomas felt a mix of confusion and curiosity as he watched her. She didn't fit the image of the savage, fierce warrior that many settlers had painted the Apache to be. Instead, there was something calm about her, something that made Thomas question everything he had ever been told. After the other soldiers had begun to deal with the settlers, Thomas found himself walking over to the Apache girl. Her gaze met his, and for a brief moment he saw something in her eyes that stopped him in his tracks. A silent plea for help. Thomas wasn't sure why he felt this way, but he had to act. He wasn't sure if it was the compassion he felt for her or the fear of what might happen to her next, but something told him he couldn't just stand by. He approached her cautiously, speaking in a calm, gentle voice. "Are you okay?" he asked. Though he knew it was a question that didn't really need an answer, she stared at him silently, but there was a softness in her expression that made him think she understood. In the few moments they shared, Thomas learned that her name was Naya. She had been caught by the settlers during a raid, and now she was being held captive. As the hours passed, a plan began to form in Thomas's mind. He didn't want her to be treated as a prisoner, as a victim of the violence that seemed to surround them every day. Naya wasn't just a captive. She was a person with her own life, her own family, and her own dreams. He didn't know why, but in that moment he decided he had to do something to protect her. When the soldiers began making plans to transport the settlers back to the fort, Thomas made his decision. He would secretly free Naya, lead her to safety, and maybe, just maybe, help her find a way back to her people. But as he approached her cell that night, the wind howling outside, things didn't go as planned. The settlement was attacked in the middle of the night by a group of Apache warriors, a situation that quickly turned chaotic. In the dark, Thomas and Naya barely managed to escape the chaos, slipping out of the camp unnoticed. However, the night was far from over. The Apache raiders, skilled in stealth and strategy, began to close in on the fort. Thomas knew they had no chance of outrunning them in the open desert. The best option was to find shelter and fast. He led Naya into a small cave just outside the settlement, hoping they could stay hidden long enough for the attackers to move on. But the night was long, and the sounds of battle echoed in the distance, rattling Thomas's nerves. He kept watch, his hand on his rifle, while Naya sat against the wall of the cave, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. Despite everything that had happened, she seemed calm. She wasn't afraid. "I never wanted this," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken grief. "I never wanted to be part of the fighting. I just want to be with my people." Thomas looked at her, sensing the depth of her sorrow. For the first time in his life, he understood that there was more to the conflicts between settlers and Native Americans than just land and war. He had seen it all from the outside, soldiers fighting to protect their homes and families while the Apache fought to preserve their way of life. But this was personal. This was about people like Naya, caught in the middle of a war they never asked for. The next morning, after the sounds of battle had faded, Thomas knew it was time to leave. The fort would be too dangerous, and Naya's people would soon be searching for her. They didn't have much time. He made a difficult decision. He would return Naya to her tribe, even if it meant facing the wrath of his fellow soldiers. With the sun rising over the horizon, Thomas and Naya set out on foot, navigating the rugged terrain of the desert. The heat was unbearable, but they pressed on. Naya, for all her strength, was exhausted, her feet sore from the long walk. But she never complained. Instead, she told him stories of her people, of their customs and traditions, and of the love they shared for the land they called home. She spoke of the beauty of the mountains, of the stars that guided them through the night, and of the strength of the Apache people. As they traveled, Thomas began to understand her in ways he never had before. She was more than just a girl from a distant tribe. She was a symbol of everything he had been taught to fear. But the more he learned about her, the more he realized that everything he had been taught was wrong. He didn't know what the future held. But as the days turned into weeks and as they drew closer to the heart of Apache territory, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a promise to Naya, one that he intended to keep. He would get her back to her people no matter the cost. And maybe, just maybe, their lives could become something more than just a story of conflict. But as he looked at her, walking beside him through the desert, Thomas knew one thing for certain. He had never met anyone like Naya before, and he couldn't imagine a world without her. The days that followed were not easy. Thomas and Naya walked for miles under the blistering desert sun, their only companions the sound of their footsteps on the dry earth and the occasional distant call of a bird of prey. They had no map, no clear sense of direction, just the hope that somehow they would find the Apache tribe that Naya had once called home. For Thomas, the journey was a test of endurance. His military training had taught him how to survive in harsh conditions, but this felt different. This was no routine patrol. This was a mission to find a girl who had been lost to him, someone he barely knew but couldn't seem to forget. Every step he took beside Naya only deepened his feelings, though he didn't yet understand what those feelings truly meant. All he knew was that he couldn't abandon her now, not after everything they had been through together. As the days turned into weeks, the physical toll on both of them began to show. Thomas had learned to rely on his instincts, but even they couldn't help them avoid the harsh realities of the desert. Their food and water supplies were running low. The water they found in the streams was scarce, and the dry, cracked earth made finding food difficult. Naya, despite her strength and resilience, began to show signs of exhaustion. She walked with her head lowered, her feet dragging as the heat and fatigue took their toll. Thomas tried to keep her spirits up, but it wasn't always easy. There were days when they spoke little, simply moving forward because there was nothing else to do. On other days, they shared quiet conversations under the cool shade of a rare tree or by a small campfire at night. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Naya spoke of her past. The words came out slowly at first, as though she had to dig deep to find them. But eventually she told Thomas the story of her family. She spoke of her father, a respected Apache leader, and of the times when she and her people had lived peacefully on their land. Naya told Thomas about her mother, who had passed away when Naya was just a girl. She had been raised by her father and the tribe, who taught her the ways of their people, the hunting, the gathering, the customs, and the traditions that had been passed down for generations. Her voice softened as she spoke of the day her village was attacked. She told him how everything changed in an instant, how their peaceful life was torn apart by the violence that swept through their homeland. Naya had been forced to flee when the soldiers arrived, and for years she had lived in fear, hiding from those who sought to take away everything she had ever known. As Thomas listened, he felt a deep sense of sorrow for the girl who had become so much more than a lost captive to him. She wasn't just a victim of war and violence. She was a survivor. Despite everything she had endured, Naya had a quiet strength that Thomas admired. She had lived through things that many people could never understand, and yet she still held on to hope for her people, for the life she had once known. "I thought I would never see my people again," Naya said, looking up at the sky. "I thought I would be lost forever in this strange world, but you're helping me find my way back." Thomas didn't know what to say. He had never been good with words, especially when it came to matters of the heart, but he felt a connection to her that he couldn't explain. He didn't know if it was love or something else, but there was something about Naya that made him feel like he had a purpose, to help her. to protect her, to ensure that she didn't have to face the world alone. Days passed, and they pressed on, always moving forward, never stopping for too long. They walked through treacherous canyons, crossed rocky hills, and navigated through barren stretches of land that seemed endless. Naya had grown quieter over the weeks, her strength fading, and Thomas couldn't help but worry. She had always been strong, but even the strongest person could only endure so much. One morning, after a particularly grueling day, Naya collapsed. Thomas had been scouting ahead for any signs of water, and when he returned, he found her lying on the ground, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Panic surged through him as he knelt beside her, gently lifting her head. "Naya, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she didn't recognize him. But then, as if realizing where she was, her lips parted in a faint smile. "I'm just tired," she whispered. "I've been walking for too long." Thomas could feel her body temperature rising. She was burning with fever, and he knew that they needed to find shelter and water fast. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms, cradling her against his chest as he scanned the horizon for any sign of life. For hours, he carried Naya through the desert, his heart racing with every step. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the land, and he could feel the weight of the day pressing down on him. He knew that time was running out. If he didn't find help soon, Naya might not survive. Just as the last light of day disappeared beyond the horizon, Thomas spotted a small oasis in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. He had never been so relieved to see something so simple as water. The sight of it gave him new strength, and he quickened his pace, carrying Naya to the cool, refreshing water. Once they arrived, Thomas carefully set her down beside the small pool. Naya was too weak to drink on her own, so Thomas cupped his hands and gently poured water into her mouth, coaxing her to drink. Slowly, the fever seemed to subside, and her breathing became less labored. It wasn't a complete recovery, but it was enough to bring some hope back to Thomas. They rested there for the night, with Thomas keeping a watchful eye on Naya, making sure that she was comfortable. As the cool desert air wrapped around them, Naya finally fell into a peaceful sleep, her body beginning to recover from the harsh journey. The next morning, when Naya awoke, her strength had returned, though not completely. She still looked weak, but the fever had broken, and there was a spark of life in her eyes again. She smiled at Thomas, a silent thank you for everything he had done. "I didn't think I would make it," she said softly, her voice still hoarse. "But you didn't give up on me." Thomas shrugged, though he couldn't hide the relief on his face. "You're strong. You can make it. We're in this together." From that moment on, their journey took on a new urgency. Naya, though still weak, pushed herself forward with renewed determination. She knew that they were close. The Apache tribe she was searching for wasn't far now, and with each step, the memories of her past, of her family, of her home began to feel more real again. But even as hope surged within them, they knew that the journey was far from over. They still had to face the harsh desert, the dangers of the unknown, and the possibility that when they finally reached the Apache tribe, things might not be as they expected. Still, they moved forward side by side with the knowledge that they were no longer just strangers lost in the desert. They were a team, bound together by something deeper than survival, a shared purpose, a shared future. And with that, Thomas and Naya continued their journey, moving ever closer to the life she had once known, a life that seemed almost impossible to imagine after everything they had endured. But as the horizon stretched out before them, both of them felt a quiet sense of hope, a hope that perhaps in the end they would find what they had been searching for all along. The journey continued, and as Thomas and Naya ventured deeper into the desert, the landscape began to change. The dry, flat expanses gave way to jagged mountains in the distance, their rocky peaks rising high into the sky. The heat was relentless, and each step felt heavier than the last. Naya, though still recovering from her earlier exhaustion, pressed on with determination. Every morning as the sun rose and cast a warm golden light over the land, they packed their things and set out again. Thomas, on the other hand, felt the weight of the journey more with each passing day. His muscles ached, his feet were sore, and the thirst from the endless sun was starting to wear on him. But there was something in Naya's eyes that kept him going. Despite her own struggles, despite the pain she must have felt, Naya never complained. She moved forward with quiet strength, never letting the challenges they faced break her resolve. The days were long, and the nights were colder than either of them had expected. The desert, while hot during the day, could be bitterly cold at night. They would huddle together for warmth by the fire, the crackling flames casting shadows against the rocky walls of the desert. Naya had begun to tell Thomas more about her people, about her tribe's customs and the stories they passed down through generations. Each tale she shared seemed to draw them closer, and Thomas started to understand more about the Apache way of life, the respect they had for nature, for their ancestors, and for each other. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Naya began to speak of something that had been heavy on her mind. "My father," she said quietly, looking into the fire. "He was the chief of our tribe. He was a wise man. Many people came to him for advice, and he led with honor. I thought I would never see him again after everything happened. I thought I was the last one left of my family." Thomas watched her as she spoke, his heart heavy with the pain in her voice. "You'll find them," he said softly, trying to offer comfort, though he wasn't sure if it would be enough. Naya didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, lost in thought. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of the desert with it, and for a moment the world seemed to grow quieter, as if everything was waiting for what came next. As the days passed, Thomas and Naya grew closer, not just out of necessity, but because they had come to depend on each other. It was no longer just about finding the Apache tribe. It was about something deeper. The bond between them, built on mutual respect and shared hardship, had grown into something neither of them had expected. Thomas had never imagined that a young Apache girl, once a stranger and a captive, would come to mean so much to him. And Naya, for all her independence and strength, had begun to see Thomas not just as a soldier or a protector, but as someone she could trust, someone she could rely on. They were no longer just traveling together to survive. They were traveling to find something: hope, family, a future. But even as their bond grew stronger, there was still the question of what would happen when they found the Apache tribe. Would they accept her? Would they see Thomas as a friend? Or would he be viewed as an outsider, someone to be mistrusted? They continued to move forward, pushing through the unforgiving desert landscape. The terrain grew steeper, the journey more difficult, and the weight of their packs felt heavier with each passing day. But neither of them complained. They didn't have time for complaints. They had only each other. One afternoon, as they climbed a steep ridge, Thomas spotted something in the distance, a small settlement nestled at the base of a mountain range. His heart raced and he motioned to Naya. "Do you see that?" he asked. Naya's eyes followed his gaze and she nodded. That's a village," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "It could be the one I'm looking for, but I don't know for sure. It's been a long time." Thomas felt a surge of excitement, but it was tempered with caution. "We'll have to be careful. We don't know who lives there or what they'll think of us." They carefully made their way toward the village, moving slowly and quietly to avoid drawing attention. The closer they got, the more Thomas could feel the tension in the air. Naya, too, seemed on edge, her gaze darting around, watching for any signs of danger. As they neared the village, they saw a few people moving about, mostly women and children, and a few older men sitting near a fire. They all seemed peaceful, but Thomas knew that appearances could be deceiving. When they reached the edge of the village, Naya hesitated. She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something unknown. Thomas could feel her nervousness, but he also saw the determination in her eyes. She was ready to face her past, ready to confront whatever awaited her. Naya turned to Thomas. "Stay close," she said quietly. "I'm not sure how they'll react to you." Thomas nodded. "I'll be right here. I won't leave you." Together they stepped into the village. The people there paused and looked at them with curiosity. Some of the women whispered to each other, while the men stared warily. Naya walked with her head held high, though Thomas could see the way her hands trembled at her sides. A tall man, older than the others, stepped forward. He had a stern face and his eyes seemed to pierce through Thomas. For a moment there was silence. Thomas could feel the weight of the moment, unsure of what to expect. Then, to his surprise, the man smiled and stepped forward. "Naya," he said, his voice warm but deep. "It's been too long. We feared you were lost forever." Tears welled up in Naya's eyes, and for the first time in weeks, Thomas saw her break down. She took a step forward and embraced the man tightly. It was a moment of reunion, of finding a place to belong. Thomas stood back, giving them space, though he could feel his heart swelling with relief. The man, still holding Naya, turned to Thomas. "You brought her back?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "I did," Thomas said simply, though the words felt inadequate. "She wasn't lost. She was waiting to be found." The man studied Thomas for a moment and then nodded. "You have my thanks," he said. "It's not often we see such kindness from the outside world." Naya stepped back from the man, wiping the tears from her face. "This is my uncle," she said, her voice trembling. "He's the leader of this village. He will help us." Thomas felt a sense of relief wash over him, but he knew their journey was far from over. They had found her people, but now they had to navigate the complexities of the Apache world, a world that was both welcoming and wary of outsiders. The next steps would be crucial. Would they truly accept him, or would he always be seen as an outsider? Would Naya find peace here, or would the shadows of her past continue to follow her? Whatever lay ahead, Thomas knew one thing for sure. This journey had changed him. It had opened his eyes to a world beyond the battlefield, beyond the conflicts he had once known only as a soldier. He had learned that there was more to a person than the label society placed on them. And now, with Naya by his side, he would face whatever came next with a newfound understanding of the world they both lived in. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Naya. Her return to the village was bittersweet. There was the joy of being reunited with her family, yet also the weight of everything that had happened since she last saw them. The village, though welcoming, was full of unfamiliar faces and memories of a life she had left behind so many years ago. She had been forced to flee when the soldiers came, and in her absence, much had changed. Thomas watched from a distance, giving Naya the space she needed to reconnect with her people. He knew that she had to come to terms with the years of separation, the struggles she had endured. Her heart was torn between the life she had built in hiding and the family she had hoped to return to one day. Thomas respected her need for space, but he couldn't help but feel both a sense of relief and anxiety as he watched her interact with her people. Though the village was small, it was a peaceful place. The men and women worked together, growing crops and raising animals. The children played in the dirt, their laughter ringing through the air. It was a life far different from the one Thomas had known, and as he watched the villagers go about their daily routines, he felt like an outsider in their world. The Apache had their own ways, their own traditions, and Thomas had no idea where he fit into all of this. Naya's uncle, the village leader, had welcomed Thomas with open arms, but there was still a sense of uncertainty between them. It wasn't that they were unfriendly. It was just that for Naya's people, outsiders were not easily trusted. The history of the Apache was one of constant struggle, and they had learned to be cautious of anyone who wasn't part of their tribe. Still, Naya's uncle had told Thomas that as long as he respected their ways and kept his distance from certain matters, he would be treated with kindness. Naya, too, seemed torn. Though she was glad to be home, she couldn't help but feel out of place. It had been so long since she had been part of the community, and the world she had known as a child felt like a distant memory. She tried to help with the work in the village, but her movements were stiff, as if she were unsure of where she belonged. The people, kind as they were, watched her with curious eyes. They had not seen her in years, and the girl who had once been a part of their tribe was now a stranger, a woman who had lived a life of hardship and survival. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Naya sat by the fire with her uncle. The village had settled into a quiet calm, the sounds of evening prayers filling the air. Naya had been quiet all day, and her uncle, sensing that something was on her mind, decided to speak with her. "Naya," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you've come back to us. But you are not the same girl who left. The world has changed you, and I can see the burden on your heart. What is it that troubles you?" Naya looked into the fire, her eyes distant. "I don't know if I belong here anymore," she said quietly. "So much has happened since I left. I've seen things I can never forget, and I've lived a life that feels so far removed from this." Her uncle nodded, understanding more than she thought. "The world is harsh, Naya. You were forced to leave when you were just a child. You've seen things that no one should ever see. But this is your home. These people are your family, and they will always be here for you. But you must decide, Naya. Do you want to return to the life you knew, or do you want to stay in the life you have now? Naya didn't have an answer. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it meant to belong, to be part of something bigger than herself. She had been a captive, a wanderer, and now, as she sat by the fire with her uncle, she felt like she was at a crossroads. She had come back, but was it too late? Could she ever return to the life she had once known, or was she forever changed by the years of struggle and hardship? The next morning, as the sun rose over the village, Thomas awoke to find Naya sitting by the river, her gaze lost in thought. He quietly approached her, not wanting to disturb her, but she sensed his presence and turned to look at him. Her expression was soft, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're up early," Thomas said gently, sitting down beside her. Naya nodded, but didn't speak at first. She stared at the flowing water, the sound of the river's gentle current calming her. "I've been thinking," she said after a long pause. "I've been thinking about everything I left behind, about my people, my family, and about you." Thomas wasn't sure what she meant, but he could sense that something important was coming. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I've spent so many years running, Thomas, running from the soldiers, running from the pain of losing my family, running from the fear of never finding a place to belong. But now I'm here, and I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were." Thomas reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Naya, you don't have to go back to the way things were. Things can be different now. You don't have to be the same person you were before. You can be whoever you want to be." Naya looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can be that person anymore. I don't know if I can fit into this life. I don't know if they'll accept me." Thomas didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. "They will accept you, Naya. You're part of this tribe. You always have been. You may have changed, but that doesn't mean you don't belong here." She was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if processing his words. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I do belong here." But even as she spoke those words, Naya knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. She had been through too much to simply return to her old life, without facing the scars that had been left behind. And yet, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace again. As the days passed, Naya began to reintegrate into the village. She helped with the work, joined in the daily rituals, and slowly she began to reconnect with her people. The children welcomed her with open arms, and the women accepted her as one of their own. The men, though wary at first, grew to trust her once they saw her strength and determination. But Thomas still felt like an outsider. Though Naya's people had been kind to him, he knew that his presence was a reminder of the world outside, a world that had taken so much from them. He knew he could never truly understand the pain and loss they had endured, but he also knew that he couldn't leave Naya now. She needed him, and in his heart he knew that he couldn't let her face this world alone. One evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, Naya and Thomas sat together by the fire. The warmth of the flames was comforting, but it couldn't erase the feeling of uncertainty that still lingered between them. "Naya," Thomas said softly, his voice steady, "I know you're struggling, but I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'll stay here as long as you need me." Naya looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Thomas replied. "I'm here because I care about you, and whatever happens, I'll be with you." For the first time in a long while, Naya smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. It was a smile that spoke of hope, of possibility, and of a future that might be brighter than the darkness that had overshadowed her for so long. As time passed, Naya found herself slowly becoming a part of the village once more. The days no longer felt as heavy as they had when she first arrived. She was learning to balance the life she had lived in hiding with the life she had once known. The villagers had welcomed her back, but deep down, Naya knew that things would never be the same. She had changed, and so had the world around her. Thomas, too, had settled into a quiet rhythm in the village. Though he was still an outsider in the eyes of many, he had earned the respect of those who saw the sincerity in his actions. Naya's uncle, the village leader, trusted him, and that trust slowly extended to others in the community. He had done what many had thought impossible. He had brought Naya back home, and for that he had earned a place among them. Yet, Thomas often found himself standing on the outskirts of the community, still unsure of where he truly fit in. But Naya, as time went on, began to see him not just as someone from the outside, but as a part of her life now, her companion, her protector, and perhaps her future. They had come a long way together, through the hardships of the desert, the uncertainty of their reunion, and the slow process of healing. They had both endured so much, but together, they had started to build something new, a bond that was slowly growing into something deeper than either of them had expected. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a warm golden light over the village, Naya sat by the fire, her thoughts heavy. She was with Thomas, who had been quietly working nearby, helping the villagers with various tasks. His presence was a comfort to her, and though they had been through so much, she found peace in knowing he was there. "I'm not sure if I'll ever feel completely at home here," Naya said softly, breaking the silence. Thomas looked up from what he was doing, sensing the weight in her voice. He walked over and sat beside her, the warmth of the fire flickering between them. "Why do you feel that way?" he asked gently. Naya paused, her fingers tracing the outline of the stone beside her. "I've been here for weeks now, and yet every time I look around, I feel like I'm still searching for something. I'm trying to find my place, but it's hard. So much has changed." Thomas understood. He had seen her struggle to fit in, to reconnect with her people, and to find peace within herself. "You're not the same person you were when you left," he said quietly. "And neither is the world around you. But that doesn't mean you don't belong here. It just means you're building something new." Naya looked at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "Do you think I can really build a life here again?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Thomas took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I believe you can, but it has to be your choice, Naya. You have to decide what you want. This life, it's not the same as the one you left behind. But that doesn't mean it can't be something just as meaningful." His words lingered in the air, and for a moment Naya was silent, lost in thought. She had lived so long in fear, so long on the run, that she had forgotten what it meant to have a real home. But now, as she sat here with Thomas by her side, she realized that the home she had been searching for wasn't just a place. It was the people around her, the life she was beginning to rebuild, and the future she was beginning to imagine. The following days were filled with small steps of healing and growth. Naya threw herself into helping with the village's work, planting crops and tending to the animals. It wasn't easy. But with each task, she felt more connected to the land and the people who shared it with her. The villagers, seeing her strength and dedication, began to accept her more fully. Slowly but surely, the walls between Naya and her community began to crumble. Thomas, too, found himself settling into the rhythms of village life. He helped with the work, but also took time to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. At first, he had felt like a stranger in a foreign land, but now, he saw the village not as a place he was visiting, but as a place he had come to love. And though he was still unsure of his place in Naya's world, he knew that he didn't want to leave her. He had come to care for her deeply, and with each passing day, his feelings for her grew stronger. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Naya turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About building something new." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I think you're right," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been trying to go back to the past, to the way things were before everything changed. But I know now that I can't do that. I have to build something new, a new life for myself, and I want you to be a part of that." Thomas felt his heart stir at her words. "I want to be a part of that too," he said quietly. The air between them shifted, and for the first time Naya felt a sense of clarity. She had spent so much of her life running from the past, from the pain of losing her family and her home. But now she saw that her future could be something different. It could be something she chose, something she built alongside the people who had accepted her back. And in a way, she could build it with Thomas, the man who had never given up on her, the man who had walked beside her through every hardship. As the days turned into weeks, Naya and Thomas began to find a new rhythm together. They worked side by side in the fields, helped the villagers with daily chores, and spent their evenings by the fire, talking about their dreams for the future. There was a quiet contentment between them now, a sense that they had both found their place together in this new life. But the challenges were not over. As much as Naya had come to accept her place in the village, she knew that there were still tensions to overcome. The past, though distant, was not easily forgotten. There were still those in the village who viewed Thomas with suspicion, who remembered the soldiers and the conflicts that had torn their lives apart. But Naya stood firm in her decision. She had found her place here, and she would not let the past define her future. One day, as they worked in the fields, Naya's uncle approached them. He was a tall, dignified man, his face lined with years of experience. "Naya," he said, his voice strong, "I've been watching you, and I see the strength in you. You've come a long way since you returned to us. The village is ready to accept you fully as one of our own again. But I have a question for you." Naya looked up at him, unsure of what to expect. "Are you ready to lead?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers. "Not just in the village, but in the heart of our people?" Naya felt her heart race. She had never expected this. The idea of leading her people, of taking on such a responsibility, was overwhelming. But she had always known that her father had been a leader, a wise and strong man. Could she live up to that legacy? Could she be the leader her people needed? After a long pause, Naya took a deep breath and answered, "I'm ready. I may not have all the answers, but I will do my best for our people." Her uncle nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. "Then it is settled. You will lead us, Naya. You will guide us toward a future where we can be strong again, together." Thomas, standing beside Naya, felt a wave of pride for her. She had found her place, not just in the village, but in her own heart. She was no longer the girl who had fled her past, but a woman who had embraced her future and the role she was meant to play. As the days continued, Naya began to step into her new role as a leader. It wasn't easy, and there were still obstacles to overcome. But with Thomas by her side and the support of her people, she knew that she could build the future she had always dreamed of, one that was rooted in strength, unity, and love. And together, Naya and Thomas began a new chapter of their lives, side by side, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. They had found not just a place to call home, but a future they would build together, one step at a time.